Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Raj Dandekar. I graduated with a PhD in machine learning from MIT in 2022, and since then I am on a mission to make artificial intelligence accessible to all. One common question which I receive from so many students during YouTube interactions and during the live classes which I teach is that what's the best way to read a research paper? There are new papers in machine learning and AI which are being released almost every day. And students, researchers, industry professionals find it difficult to keep up with the pace of so many papers being coming out. So I thought that why don't I make a video to explain how I read a research paper. And now with artificial intelligence tools, the process of reading and understanding a research paper can become much faster if you implement the right techniques. So, in this video, I am going to show you three techniques which you can use to read a research paper, and then all of us will take an oath together that we'll read at least one research paper every week. So, let's get started with this video. All right. So I'll make this video as if I've discovered a new paper, and then I'll show you exactly how I implement my research paper reading process so that you can follow the same process as you read research papers. As I mentioned, I'm going to explain three techniques to you. And the paper which I've selected is, let's say, I come across this paper on my LinkedIn feed, or someone shares this paper with me that this is a cool new paper, and then immediately what I do is I first skim through the paper very quickly just to see the length of the paper, the figures, the tables, etc., without going into anything in depth. So that's the first thing which I do. I just go through the paper quickly, and then what I do is I usually decide which of these three techniques what I want to implement. So the three techniques which I'm going to teach you today are: first is the bird's eye mode of reading a machine learning paper, the second is the podcast mode, and the third is the in-depth mode. And I choose the mode based on how deep I want to go into reading the paper. So if I just want to have a quick read of the paper and just summarize in my mind, or if I just want to, let's say, add a quick citation to a research paper which I've already written, I'll probably implement the bird's eye mode. If I want to go into a bit more depth, and if I want to explain this paper to my colleague, or if I want to discuss this paper with my friends, I'll probably go ahead with the podcast mode. On the other hand, if I'm teaching a class and if I want to conduct an entire podcast or an entire webinar or teach a live class on a research paper topic, I'll go with the in depth mode. I also usually go with in depth modes on papers which have become very popular, such as the deep seek paper, etc. So let's get started with the first mode now, which is the bird's eye mode. As the name itself suggests, bird's eye mode is essentially zooming out and understanding the key aspects of the paper so that it forms a story in your mind. That's it. This is the simplest way of reading a paper, and it's also quite effective because you get the gist of the paper and what's going on. And let me show you how I will read this paper in a bird's eye mode. In a bird's eye mode, the key thing is that you have to go through the following things in the paper. First, you have to go through the abstract, then, you have to go through the figures and tables, then, you have to go through the conclusion, and finally, you have to write a 5 to 7 sentence summary on your own without using ChatGPT or any other AI tool. These are the four steps which we need to follow if we want to read a paper in a bird's eye mode. So let me show you how I will follow these steps. So first step is reading the abstract, right? So what I do is I read the abstract. As LLMs become increasingly proficient in producing human-like responses, there has been a rise of academic and industrial pursuits dedicated to flagging a given piece of text as human or AI. Most of these pursuits involve modern NLP detectors without paying too much attention to the issues of interpretability and explainability. In our study, we provide a comprehensive analysis that shows that traditional ML models perform as well as modern NLP detectors in human versus AI text detection. Subsequently, by employing the explainable AI technique, we uncover parts of the input that contribute most to the model's prediction. Our study contributes to the growing need for developing production level LLM detection tools. Finally, the LIME techniques we demonstrate also have the potential to equip these detection tools with interpretability analysis. I read this abstract and probably I'll read it once more, and immediately I understand some key things which are happening in this paper, right? The first thing which I understand is this paper essentially looks at text and it classifies the text as to whether it's written by humans or whether it's written by AI. That's the first level of pattern which forms in my mind. The second level of pattern is that this study compares modern NLP techniques as well as traditional NLP techniques, and they claim that traditional NLP techniques can also be effectively used for detecting text as whether it's human generated or AI generated. And the third thing which I understand from the abstract, or the third pattern which is formed in my mind, is that they also conduct an interpretability analysis, which they are calling something called as LIME, interpretability analysis, which they are calling as LIME. These are the three things which they are doing, and their main contribution seems to be from the fact that many current papers only focus on modern NLP methods, but they are showing that even traditional NLP or ML methods can do very well in this classification task. And the second major contribution seems to be interpretability. So when I read this abstract, I understand the basics of what they are going to do in the paper, and I want to read on further because especially I'm interested in these two parts. How well do traditional ML methods do compared to modern ML methods in this detection? And I'm especially keen to see the interpretability because I hate to see ML as a black box. So whenever authors do an interpretability analysis, I'm usually very excited to see what they have done. So that's the first point, which is the abstract. The second point is essentially going through the figures and the tables. So what I'll do, I scroll down below, I'll directly go to the tables. So here we'll see the first table is hyperparameters for all the traditional ML models. So here immediately I see that the traditional ML models which they use are naive Bayes, logistic regression, random forest, XGBoost, multi-layer perceptron, and LSTM. That's the traditional ML models which they use. And the hyperparameters seem to be epoch, batch size, learning rate, weight decay, optimizer, loss function, scheduler. So, okay, and then I figure out that this is a table for the traditional ML methods, and here's a table for the modern NLP methods, which are Roberta Sentinel and T5 Sentinel. And here the hyperparameters which they're using are epoch, batch size, learning rate, weight decay, optimizer, loss function, and scheduler. Right. So I understand that these two tables give me the list of modern methods, traditional methods, and the list of hyperparameters. I scroll down further below and then I go to the results section. So here I can see some ROC curves, the DET curves, but I will scroll down below and here I see the classification metrics. So I immediately know that these are the metrics which they have used to detect how well the model is classifying whether the text is human written or AI written. And as I scroll down below, I am presented with this table. And I immediately know that this is one of the most important pieces of the paper because here it says evaluation results on the text dataset. And here they have presented the accuracy, F1 score, false positive rate, false negative rate, true negative rate, and true positive rate. Now, I am aware of these terms beforehand. But if you are not aware of these terms, you can immediately ask ChatGPT or search on Google so that you can understand these results table. So I can immediately see here that the Roberta and the T5 methods they have very good accuracy, but even LSTM and MLP they have good accuracy. And especially I pay attention to the true positive rate and true negative rate because these values usually need to be high in classification tasks. And I can see that these last three models have a very high true positive ratio and true negative ratio. So they seem to be working the best. Even XGBoost actually has a very high accuracy, and it also has a very high true negative rate and true positive rate. So I form these conclusions in my mind, and then I scroll down below and I see this table, see this figure. So here actually they have converted whatever they have shown in this table into a figure format, right? And here I can see that the green represents the true positive rate and true negative rate. So light green represents true negative rate, and light dark green represents true positive rate, whereas light red represents false negative rate and dark red represents false positive rate. So if a model is performing well, the things in the green should be much higher than the things in the red. So from this figure, we can immediately see that naive Bayes, logistic regression, random forest do not perform that well, whereas XGBoost has very low red colors, and Roberta Sentinel, T5 Sentinel, and LSTM also have very low red. So they are the best performing models. And then I also read the caption. The caption mentions that the stacked bar graph compares the performance of 8 models. The T5 Sentinel model shows the highest effectiveness with a 0.996 probability of true positive rate and 0.96 for true negative rate. Roberta Sentinel follows closely. Oops. Um, Let me go down to that figure again. Yeah, Roberta Sentinel follows closely. So your true positive rate and true negative rate is mentioned. And then they say random forest struggles while logistic regression and LSTM perform consistently. So until this point in the bird's eye method, I have an understanding of the fact that they have compared modern methods and traditional methods. And in that comparison, I have seen that the modern methods like Roberta and T5 perform well, but traditional methods like XGBoost and LSTM are also not far behind. All of this I've understood just from reading the figures and the captions which are present in the figure. See, in the bird's eye mode, I'm not reading the entire paper at all, because this is the mode in which it's a quick read, but still I need to digest it enough so that I understand their results. Then I scroll down below, and then I see that they have also tested the model on custom data set. And here also I directly look at the red color here, and I can see that MLP, Roberta Sentinel and T5 Sentinel perform the best. Then I scroll down below, and then I see that they have the last section on Lime, which is the interpretability analysis. This is the part which is very interesting to me. So I directly jump down to their figures. And so here I can see that this is the sample generated by GPT-4o, and they'll probably use this to for interpretability analysis. So okay, let's scroll down below to see what they have. Yeah. So here the data set which was shown over here right now is fed to an MLP model, and we can see that this is generated by AI clearly. And here it's written that the line plot illustrates the significance of various features in classifying the sample as AI. We can observe from figure 6 that the sample text is predicted as AI generated with probability of 1. So that's good. And the key thing is that the words which contributed the most to making this prediction are significant and leading. These are the top two contributing features for the prediction. And here you can see that that's why significant and leading are marked with the darkest colors. So again, this is quite cool. They seem to have performed an interpretability analysis, and they have checked or looked at those words which contribute the most to flagging this text as AI. And here they have implemented multi-layer perceptron, but on this same figure they have also seem to have implemented T5 Sentinel. And here they say that the top two contributing features are history and was. So was and history seem to be the top two contributing features for classifying this text as AI. Great. And then that the last thing is they also do this for the LSTM model. And here again, significant seems to be the topmost contributing feature for AI. Who knows why significant is the topmost contributing feature for classifying it as AI generated, but that's the conclusion which seems to have come out. So here you can see I've gone through all the figures, I've gone through the tables, and I've understood the results which they have in terms of comparing the traditional versus the modern frameworks. And I've also understood the results in terms of interpretability analysis, which they have done for different models. So that's how the second part is done now, which is essentially figures and tables. Third part is I go through the conclusion, right? So here what I do is I go to the conclusion section and then I read. This study explored the effectiveness of both traditional as well as advanced deep learning models. Notably, while deep learning models like T5 and Roberta, which we also call modern models, have a very high accuracy, traditional models like XGBoost and Random Forest also perform commendably. XGBoost achieved an impressive accuracy of 0.91. On a custom dataset, MLP maintained a strong performance, while advanced models like Roberta also excelled with 0.92 accuracy. So, in the first two paragraphs, they have seemed to strengthen their claim that modern methods and traditional methods both perform equally, and there is not really any special reason to only use modern methods like Roberta and T5. Then they talk about LIME, which is the interpretable model agnostic explanations. And here they have said that this approach allowed us to uncover the key features driving the model's decision in distinguishing AI generated text from human written content. While our results are promising, there are limitations. So they mentioned the limitation as the size and scope of the data set used. A larger and more diverse data set could further validate the findings. Additionally, the study predominantly focused on ChatGPT generated text, which limits the applicability to other LLMs. Future research will address these limitations by expanding the dataset to include a wider variety of text sources. In summary, our study highlights the continued importance of traditional machine learning models in the rapidly evolving field of text classification. And here they have also provided their GitHub repository, which I can go ahead and check. So that's the third part which is concluded. I can clearly see their conclusion first is related to comparing traditional versus modern methods, and then how their LIME interpretability analysis makes their paper different from others. So when I've gone through parts number one, two, and three, I've essentially understood an overall vision of the paper and what their results essentially are trying to say. And remember that if I'm reading a paper in bird's eye mode, I usually read it in 20 to 25 minutes. It's as fast as that. If the paper is challenging or if the paper is a bit more complex, it might take 40 to 45 minutes because if I don't know some terminologies, I need to Google them. But I don't ever do a bird's eye reading without writing a 5 to 7 sentence summary. So this is extremely important. I usually maintain an Excel sheet such as this where you can actually mention the paper title. So what I do is I uh, I then copy the paper title from here. I paste the paper title over here, and then what I do is I usually add the authors, the journal, the year published, the link, etc. All these are quite easy to add. But then the most important thing which I do is I add the summary. So I add 5 to 6 sentences here which I write on my own. That's the most important. If you just use ChatGPT to summarize, your understanding won't be tested. So here I will write that the paper compares traditional ML methods like XGBoost, then MLP, random forest with advanced NLP techniques, like um, Roberta and T5 Sentinel for classifying a text as human versus AI. That's my first point in my summary. Then I write the second point that traditional methods, traditional methods like XGBoost also perform reasonably well. Then I write that interpretability analysis, interpretability LIME is performed. So usually I write 6 to 7 sentences, but here I am just showing this to you for a sake of demonstration. I usually write this summary and then I color code it with a green color or some color. So usually I have a sheet which is maintained like this, which has a list of all the papers which I have read and their 5 to 7 sentence summary, especially if I'm reading the paper in a bird's eye mode. So if you don't have enough time during the day, you can still allocate 25 to 30 minutes for reading a paper in a bird's eye mode, where you can go through all these 4 steps and you can maintain a 5 to 7 sentence summary of what you have understood. Please make sure that when you write the summary, you don't just ask ChatGPT for the summary and you're writing it yourself. That will really test your understanding. So there is really no excuse for not reading a paper, because if you follow the bird's eye mode, it just takes 25 to 35 minutes of your entire day, right? But that will keep you up to date with the modern progress which is happening. And in case you, if you don't understand some terminologies, don't leave the paper. Just try to Google it, ask Chat GPT, and if you still don't understand, still finish going through all these 4 steps and make a summary of what you have read, and just mention terms not understood. That's good. That is still a job well done, and that still counts as the fact that you have read a paper. All right, so that's the first method which I use if I want a quick summary of the paper, but still I want to retain elements or patterns in my mind of what this paper has actually done. That's the bird's eye mode. The second mode is the podcast mode, and this mode would not have existed if not for one AI tool, and that AI tool is called as Notebook LM. Notebook LM is an incredible AI tool which is powered by Google. And what they actually do is that you can go to notebooklm.com.google, you can click on try Notebook LM. Here, what you can do, go to create new, and then here you can choose the file to upload. So you can go ahead and directly upload the um, a downloaded file of this paper. Once you go ahead and upload this file or the PDF of the paper, um, let's see what's going on here. Error uploading source. So let me try uploading once more. Um, Remove source. So let's see. Okay, so here you can see that I've uploaded the source document over here. And what you get is that you get an interface like this, where you can, of course, interact with this source. Like, what is the key summary of this document? And you can press enter, and then you will get a summary of essentially what's going on in the paper. But you may think, okay, this happens in Chat GPT also, right? What's so cool about this? The cool thing about Notebook LM is that you can generate a podcast over here. So there is a button here called generate podcast, and if you click on this, you can see that a 17-minute podcast has been generated for me right now. In this 17-minute podcast, you can listen to this podcast and completely understand what is being mentioned in the paper. This is an amazing podcast, and it's between two people, so it's as if two people are discussing with each other about the paper. I'm sure you will not be able to hear this when I play it, but so here the podcast is, the one person is saying in the podcast, like, have you ever stopped and thought how to distinguish between whether text is real or not? Then the other person would say, that's a very interesting question. So, how do we actually figure out whether a given piece of text is real or not? And then these two people go on discussing this entire paper for 17 minutes, and they go through every single thing in the paper in a lot of detail. So, it's as if some teacher is explaining to you a summary of this paper. This tool did not exist 1 or 2 years back, but now with this tool, you essentially have a mentor who has knowledge about the paper and who is explaining that knowledge to you in 18 minutes. And this conversation type of structure is again very cool, because it feels very immersive, and the technical depth is also very very good. So if you are, let's say, going on an exercise, right, and if you want to somehow integrate research paper reading into your routine, just download this podcast. So you can download this podcast as an mp3 file, and you can play it on your earphones when you are exercising. That way you can easily integrate research paper reading in your schedule. And I think podcast, this second version, this podcast mode is a bit more deeper than bird's eye mode, because in a podcast mode you will go into a lot of details regarding how the data set was processed, what were the results, what were the limitations. So it's a lot more, it's a condensed 17-minute version, but it's more detailed than the bird's eye mode. Remember that once you finish listening to the podcast, you again have to go to the paper summary, and you have to maintain a 5 to 7 sentence summary of what you have listened to. That is extremely important. Unless you write down things yourself, you will not actually understand, or you will not actually test your understanding regarding the paper. So you might listen to this podcast and you might think that, okay, I've understood it, it's quite simple. But the only way to test your understanding is when you go back home, sit on your laptop and write the summary of what you have just listened to. They also have an interactive mode where you can actually join the discussion, and then you can say that, but what if, but what if the text was generated in this manner, or what if traditional ML methods don't work very well? And then the people, the hosts which are conducting the podcast, they actually change their answers in real time. It's incredible, right? It's essentially exactly like interacting with a teacher or a tutor regarding the paper. So I think that all of you can make maximum use of this tool for reading research papers. This tool did not exist 2 years back, so people thought that reading papers is very hard and they might not be able to do it very well. But that's not the case right now. All of you have a mentor in your houses for free who has knowledge of all the papers in the world. You can just upload the PDF to the mentor, and the mentor will generate a podcast, and the mentor will teach you then through the podcast. That's incredible, right? And you get this for free. There is no payment to access this tool. But not many people, not many researchers, not many students seem to use it. So instead of just complaining that research papers are hard to read and I don't get time, you can manage time. So as I mentioned, the bird's eye mode takes 20 to 25 minutes. The podcast mode doesn't even need you to be present in front of a laptop. You just need to download the podcast maybe early in the morning and then play it whenever you have free time. But just remember that when you go through the first method, bird's eye mode, and the podcast mode, you have to maintain a paper summary. You have to maintain a summary of essentially 5 to 7 sentences. That's very important to test your understanding. And now the third type of mode, which is in-depth mode, is what I usually reserve for papers which I want to teach to a live class, or papers which have become very famous like the deep seek architecture. Here I actually spend 3 to 4 hours or even more to read through a paper. So what I do in this in-depth mode is that I'm sitting with a notepad like this whiteboard right now, and as I'm reading through the paper, I'm making notes. So here, as I'm going through the abstract, I'm making notes that uh, LLMs are becoming increasingly popular. So that's the first thing, right? LLMs are becoming increasingly popular. LLMs are becoming popular, and then what's so here it's saying that they produce increasingly human-like responses and being applied in all types of fields like education, journalism, cyber security, politics, etc. Then I usually write this that human-like responses, and then I experiment with different inks so that it's also fun. So the different fields are um, education, cyber security, politics, etc. So let's say this is the first point which I write. I usually write in a lot more detail than this, but here I'm just showing for illustrative purposes. Then I go down below, and then I try to think about, or then I try to write about the methodology. So here I would make this section called methodology, and then I make the first section here, which is the data generation. And here I first read what they have exactly written. So here it says that they are using two data sets, the AI generated and the human generated. So there are two types of data set, the AI generated and the human generated data set. And then I will see how this data set is constructed. So to get the AI generated data set, they use the open GPT text data set. So they use the open GPT OpenGPT text dataset. Then I will go to understand what this OpenGPT text dataset is, curated by 35. So I'll look at citation number 35 over here. Let's see. So citation number 35 is this. And then I'll search this, right? So then I'll say OpenGPT text dataset. So then I can see that they have this repository, and this seems to be the dataset. I also check the number of forks and stars on this repo. I check the dataset here, and here I can see that the OpenGPT text is there. So I can usually open it and I can see what the dataset is. So here you can see that I go in a lot of depth in every single sentence. So after reading this part, which is related to the dataset and the types of data itself, then what I'll do is that um, I see where the human generated text is coming from, and that's coming from open web text. Open web text. So then I'll go ahead and search about open web text. Sorry, open web text. And I see that open web text is this huge corpus where we can download data sets from, and which consists of Reddit submissions, etc. So then I read about this, I understand this a lot better. Then I move to the next part, which is essentially data pre-processing. So first part is done, which is data generation. Then I move to the next part, which is essentially data pre-processing. And then what I'll do is that I'll read what has been mentioned here. So they have 80% training data, 20% testing data. So remember, all of these things were completely missed during the bird's eye mode and maybe during the podcast mode also. But this is the most in-depth mode of reading. And here I am trying to demonstrate that you should always make notes if you are trying to read a paper in depth for 3 to 4 hours, or if the paper is very important for you. Without making notes, you will never understand a paper in depth. So that's the second thing, which is data pre-processing and the methodology. Then the third part which I go to is with respect to the modeling itself. And then I try to read what they have mentioned in the modeling, the different types of ML models which they have used. Sometimes I may just take a copy, I may take a copy here and then I may paste it over here. So I make this thing over here and I use the different font. I like this Virgil font over here. Oops, I'll reduce the size a bit. So I make this note that these are the models which they have used. Then I will make a note of the hyperparameters which they have used. So then I'll make a note of the hyperparameters which they have used. I'll also maybe take a screenshot of this table and check my understanding of all of these hyperparameters. So I'll take a screenshot over here. I'll put this screenshot over here, and then I'll actually try to read what each of these is actually saying. So, for example, what does it mean by boosting iterations? What does it mean by GB tree? I'll search about all of these things. What is meant by log loss? What is meant by LBFGS? So let me search LBFGS logistic regression. LBF LBFGS logistic regression, right? So then I'll search about this, and then I'll see what essentially LBFGS is in logistic regression. I'll probably understand more about this algorithm. Um, so this is how I'll do a deep dive into things which I don't understand. So I'll maintain this table like this, and then I'll move to the next part. So after I understand about the hyperparameters, I'll move to the results part. So here I'm just showing a demonstration here, but usually the modeling part is pretty big, right? So I'll make a big note of what all different models have been used, the hyperparameters, etc. But I'm just trying to show you the level of depth which I usually go here. Then I go through the results section. In the results section, what I'll usually do is that I'll understand these curves. I'll make a screenshot of this. Um, I'll make a screenshot of this. I'll bring it into the document, and then I'll try to very closely inspect what everything means. So I can see that the purple line is for MLP. So I can see that the purple line is for MLP, whereas naive base, this is not very good. That's naive base. Again, I'll check the DET curve and I'll see that this is for naive base. So I'll analyze these curves much more closely than we did in the bird's eye mode, or when we did in the podcast mode. So similarly, I scroll down below and I'll pay a lot of attention on this table. So I'll take this table and bring it over here, and then I'll try to actually visually inspect, okay, why are the results like this? Then I'll try to think that why is knife base so low in accuracy? What might be the reason for it? Then I try to think fundamentally. I may even take help of GPT-4 for understanding this. Finally, when I've inspected all the results and I've made a note of all these results, then I go to the lime part, which is the last part. So then I go to the lime part, and remember that all throughout this process, there are several places which I may encounter which I do not understand. At this moment, I make maximum use of GPT, GPT 4.0, and sometimes I also use Claude for coding related sections which I have not understood. If the research paper involves a lot of mathematics and calculations, I usually go through them. If they look straightforward and not very hard. But if they look very complex, I usually skip the mathematics part and I read the other parts and try to make notes on the other parts. So then I make notes on the lime. First of all, if I don't know the lime technique, I'll try to search about it. Lime interpretability, and then I see that there is a huge number of material on this. So usually I'll probably search for good explanations. So I'll look for posts which talk about lime, and so for example, this seems to be a good post which talks about lime. So I'll read about it. I'll probably go through a video if it has been attached over here, etc. So this looks like a very detailed post with also video. So I'll click on this video and probably read about it, understand it more. So in depth mode, I try to understand all the things which have been presented in the paper in a lot of detail, because only then I'm confident that I've truly understood the paper. So for example, when the DeepSeek V3 paper was released, right, this technical report, it's a brilliantly written report. I went through this 53 pages for many days. I made notes. That's the reason for the Build DeepSeek from Scratch series, which I have. Without making these type of notes and without actually understanding what is written on every single page, it's very difficult to make a YouTube series or to teach someone. So for that, you definitely have to read a paper in depth. That's it. So that's the lime part, and then I will make a note on the conclusions part. So this is the results part, and then I will make a note on the conclusions part. So I usually make a note on the conclusions in 4 or 5 different points here. I don't include, when I am in in-depth mode, I don't maintain an Excel sheet, because these notes which I'm maintaining, that itself are much more comprehensive than maintaining a 5 to 7 sentence summary in the Excel sheet. But when I spend 3 to 4 hours reading a paper, I usually feel very satisfied, because I am going through a lot of details as I mentioned over here. So it also strengthens my understanding. So, just to summarize, there are three modes of reading a research paper which I implement. Bird's eye mode for a quick review if I want to understand a paper quickly, or if I want to include a quick citation in a research paper. Second is the podcast mode, where you have to dive a bit deeper, where you get the podcast between the two guests. You download that podcast and you can even listen to it later during the day, even if you don't have a laptop in front of you. The bird's eye mode and the podcast mode are very highly suited for all of you to read a research paper, 1 or 2 research papers every week without fail. Uh, the third mode, which is the in-depth mode, takes a lot of time and commitment, and usually you have to overcome that mental block of not understanding things. But the in-depth mode is truly satisfying if you sit through for 3 to 4 hours, if you make all the notes just like how I'm showing right now. And if you don't understand things, you seek out the information from somewhere. If you don't understand things, you go to LinkedIn, try to find out if anyone has made a post about it. Or if you go to YouTube, try to read through or try to watch a video, or go to chat GPT to ask a doubt. One thing which is very important in all of these three is that you need to have patience for reading a research paper. You definitely need to have patience, because if you don't have patience, then whenever things get hard or whenever you encounter a concept which you don't know, you will leave the paper. That's the worst thing to do. If you don't understand something, never ever leave it. Just move forward. Don't stop and just let go and think that this is so boring. Just move forward. Just maintain there is an end goal for every each of these three methods, right? For the first two methods, the end goal is maintaining a 5 to 7 sentence summary. So no matter how bored you get or how much you don't understand, make it a point that you write this summary. And if you are in in-depth mode, there will be many places where you feel that this is so hard and I don't want to make notes, but that is where you push through. That is where you show persistence, and then you finish making the notes regardless of what you're feeling. One thing which I want all of us to do right now, it's let us take an oath, which is the research oath. And the research oath is something like, no matter what happens, you will read one research paper every week. No matter what happens, I will read one research paper every week. And you can read it in any of the three modes. You can read it in bird's eye mode, podcast mode, or in-depth mode. That does not matter. The What matters is that you get into a habit. You get into a habit of reading research papers. This habit will be extremely crucial for you, no matter what you are doing, whether you are a student, whether you are a researcher, whether you are a working professional. This habit of reading a research paper every week is extremely important for job transitions. If you want to apply to grad school, it's probably the most important habit you will ever develop. So please make sure to read one research paper every week. Maintain this summary if you are doing bird's eye mode or the podcast mode. At least once in 2 weeks or once in 3 weeks, there should be one paper which you read in depth mode, because that is truly satisfying. Now comes the question of how to find the paper itself to read, right? So if you are active on LinkedIn, you will see if some paper has become very popular. So you should read that. If you are not active on LinkedIn, then there is the website called Papers with Code. You can go to this website, it's paperswithcode.com, and here you can check the trending research. Like this paper seems to be trending right now, right? So just download this paper and just start reading this paper this week. So the oath which we have taken, you can start with this paper because it seems to be trending here. So that might be a very good paper. Um, Other papers which are trending, you can take a look at this paper, or there might be some things which are just techniques. I'm not sure if they're papers. I think this is a, yeah, all of these are papers. So you can click on this, read this paper, whichever ones are the ones which you find interesting. Just download it and make the commitment that I will read this week, no matter what happens, with whichever technique you want to implement: bird's eye mode, podcast mode, or in-depth mode. I hope this video really helps everyone who is planning to s- get into ML or AI research. Let this thing of let research not be an obstacle for you. You can start with the simple technique, which is a bird's eye or a podcast mode. For the first 1 month, you can only try these two techniques. After that, once you get comfortable with reading papers, then you can go to the in-depth mode. So thanks everyone. I hope this helps you, and let's all read at least one research paper every week. Thank you.